And we're on Twitter at BBC Talkback. Jeremy Corbyn has denied that his party is in crisis after the suspension of the Labour MP Naz Shah and the former London Mayor Ken Livingstone, who have both been accused of making anti-Semitic remarks and bringing their party into disrepute. But some commentators are now questioning whether it is even possible to criticise the actions of the State of Israel without facing that allegation of anti-Semitism. The former MP George Galloway, who's the Respect candidate for Mayor of London, is with us, along with the DUP MP Jeffrey Donaldson. Welcome to both of you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let's go straight to that, George. Are you concerned that the allegation of anti-Semitism is now being deployed rather regularly to shut down any criticisms of Israel?
Yes, and it's very foolish because it brings about the opposite to that which those who do it claim they are concerned about. It conflates Judaism, religion, and Zionism, which is politics and an ideology. I give you a very simple analogy. Those who wanted to bring down the Soviet Union didn't hate Russians. Indeed, they would have argued the opposite, that they wanted to free the Russians from the yoke of communism. So being opposed to a political state, a political ideology, is, of course, diametrically different from being a hater of a religion or the people who follow that religion. So it's very foolish from every point of view, but it's an everyday occurrence now. And in truth, there are people who want to make that conflation and thus illegitimize and even if they can, illegalize any criticism of Israel's political system.
Are you suggesting that there's some kind of choreography here, some kind of campaign that's been organised to mount this kind of allegation?
Organised, but I think it's been organised by opponents of Jeremy Corbyn, who may have actually nothing to do with the issue of Zionism, Judaism. They may care nothing about the Middle East. What they care about is overthrowing Jeremy Corbyn, and this slow-moving coup has been underway almost since the day and hour that he was overwhelmingly elected.
So it's a kind of proxy war, as we were discussing yesterday.
Yes, it's well put. They're trying to create chaos and then say, oh, look at all this chaos, we must change our leader. We can't go on like this.
Jeffrey Donaldson, what do you think? Is this debate about anti-Semitism really about something else, first of all?
Well, I don't think that it is, William, and I mean, anyone who knows Jeremy Corbyn, and I think George and I both know him quite well because we've been around Parliament long enough. I mean, Jeremy couldn't be described by any stretch of the imagination as a supporter of Israel. He has been very close to the Palestinian cause for many years and supported that cause in Parliament and indeed facilitated visits by Palestinians to Parliament. So I don't think anyone could argue that in acting in this way, Jeremy Corbyn is trying to shut down the debate on Israel or criticism of Israel. Far from it. He's been a very strong critic of Israel himself. George knows more about the Labour movement than I do, and his conspiracy theory I'm not going to get into. But I will say this, William, that when you make comments like the Jews should be removed from what is now the State of Israel, then I do think you cross a line, you cross a boundary.
Who made that comment?
Well, there are people who have made that comment, and I mean, for example, some of the extremists on the Palestinian side argue vehemently that the only solution is not a two-state solution, but is to drive the Jews out of Israel. And we need to be very careful about the language we use. We support the concept of a two-state solution. We want to see a negotiated settlement. We believe Israel should sit down and negotiate, and hopefully an agreement can be reached. But I think that there's a fine line between criticising Israel, and it's perfectly valid for people to criticise Israel if that is their viewpoint and to support the Palestinian cause. But, when you get into the idea, and bear in mind, many of the states in the Middle East are Islamic states. They actually have in their constitution, the title of their country is the Islamic State of Iraq, for example. So there are Islamic states in the Middle East. and Israel is recognised as a homeland for many of the Jews, and therefore, whilst of course people are entitled and we have freedom of speech to criticise Israel, they need to be careful that in doing so they don't accept this other agenda, which is that the Jews have no right to be there.
Jeffrey, do you believe if someone argues if someone claims they do not recognise the state of Israel, that is in itself anti-Semitic?
Not necessarily. I think that that people don't recognise many states. For example, Kosovo is not recognised by a large number of countries, and I don't think anyone would argue that it is anti-Islamic not to recognise Kosovo. So I don't think that argument in itself holds water. But I think, as I say, William, it's when people go a bit further and actually criticise the concept of a Jewish state that I think you're then getting into territory that becomes more difficult, and it could be argued that it is potentially anti-Semitic.
Would you agree with that, George, that in itself takes you into anti-Semitic territory, having that conversation? Have we lost George? I think we may have lost George. George, are you there? We'll see if we can get him back. Yeah. Let me pursue that with you, Jeffrey, because let's take it further. The debate about the right of the Palestinian people to return to Israel. It's been a big debating point, obviously, in many of the debates over the years. Some people have said that the right to return... Now, I grant you it's a minority position, but some people have said that the right to return to Israel argument in itself is a kind of anti-Semitic argument, because that would overwhelm the demographics of Israel and would essentially be another way of removing Judaism from Israel. Do you regard that as anti-Semitic?
Well, I mean, it is perfectly valid for people to talk about territory, of course, and who should inhabit territory. But, I think we also have to be pragmatic, William. We are where we are. The reality is that there are millions of Jews living in what is now the State of Israel. The State of Israel is established. It's recognised in international law. It's recognised by international institutions. It's a democratic state. And I think that the idea that we could reverse that is just not realistic at all. And I do think there is a fine line between, on the one hand, arguing that there needs to be some kind of settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians around, who inhabits what territory, and suggesting that the Israelis have no right to inhabit the territory at all, in which case I think you are straying into territory which begins to be regarded as anti-Semitic. And there are people who are openly anti-Semitic. I mean, I've read stuff online. I'm not suggesting any British politician has used intemperate language, but, the constitution of Hamas, who now govern Gaza, is very clear. They believe Israel should be driven, the Israelis, the Jews, should be driven into the sea. So, we just need to be careful that we don't say anything that would underpin that kind of racist approach.
And does it follow from that? I think we've got George Galloway. I'll bring him back in a second after this question, Jeffrey. But does it follow from what you've just said, that if you share a platform with someone who's from Hamas or give some support to Hamas in any way, that you are fueling anti-Semitism in your judgment?
No, not at all, because, of course, you could use the platform to criticise anti-Semitism. You could use the platform to challenge anti-Semitism. So, no, I don't buy into the argument that says that if you share a platform with a particular person, that it means you're vindicating or justifying their stance. In fact, quite the opposite. I think you could use that opportunity to challenge them on it. George
Galloway, welcome back. We lost you for a second, technically. We're trying to put in the red lines here. We're trying to work out what are the demarcations of anti-Zionism, anti-Israel attitudes, anti-Jewish attitudes, anti-Semitism. Help us with that.
Well, I missed much of what Jeffrey, whom I respect, had to say, so if you'll forgive me, I won't be able to reference most of the points that I'm sure that he made. But let me give you an example from my own life. I'm wearing a hat now because my head is scarred. I'm walking with a limp because I was quite badly damaged in a physical assault on the streets of London by a man who went to prison who had converted to Judaism just a few weeks before he committed the assault. But by the very act of converting to Judaism, he was, like me, from a Catholic background originally, By the very act of converting, he gained himself the so-called right of return to a land that millions of Palestinians have been banished from and are forbidden to return, even though they have homes and land there. So this is clearly absurd. It's a religion. Catholicism is a religion. Protestantism is a branch of the Christian religion. Religions don't have the right to a state. They don't have the right to take someone else's land and insist that this is now their state. Now, Jeffrey, I did hear say, and he's right, we are where we are. The idea of transporting, to use that very loaded and even sinister term, Israeli Jews to the United States, for example, as Naz Shah scribbled foolishly on Facebook. That's all, of course, ridiculous. We are where we are. But I believe the only solution is one democratic state in Israel-Palestine, called Israel-Palestine, where all the Jews, Christians, there are many Christians, we're always forgotten, and Muslims live together as equal citizens. Now, is that anti-Semitic? How could it possibly be? Yet there will be some who, even as I speak, are uttering that calumny.
Because they think that would, essentially, demographically wipe out the Jewish population of Israel in terms of the Jewish state concept.
Well, if we gave the Muslims and Christians a vote, you mean? That's called apartheid in any other context, William. There are millions of Palestinians living in Israel-Palestine right now under occupation for 60 years who don't have a vote. So if the only way to maintain a Jewish majority in that territory is not to give the natives a vote, you can see where I'm going with this. That's exactly apartheid, South Africa.
Jeffrey Donaldson, would you go that far and use that language?
Well, it's not for us to dictate what the solution should be in the Middle East any more than it would have been for outside.
But take George's point seriously. You wouldn't accept that here as a definition of democracy, would you?
Well, we do have a degree of segregation in Northern Ireland because of the 30 years of conflict.
Everyone gets a vote.
And therefore, William, you can't ignore the reality that for decades the Israelis and Palestinians have been fighting each other. And the idea that you can all suddenly just lump them all in together, living side by side, and it'll be a peaceful, tolerant and stable society, I think defies the reality. And therefore, I don't subscribe to the view that a one-state solution is likely to emerge from the Middle East peace process. I think the more likely outcome is a two-state solution.
Ken Livingstone's comments at George Galloway, what he said yesterday in the interview and the little bit of history that he got us into. Obviously, we've had all kinds of historians now debating how much truth there was to what he said yesterday. Mainstream historians tend to disagree in general with the full picture that he described, though there seems to be some historical evidence to suggest that some parts of the Nazi movement had some connections with Zionism. Whether or not Adolf Hitler was part of those conversations or whether he resisted them from the very start seems to be the nature of that debate. Anyway, do you regard what Ken Livingstone said yesterday as anti-Semitic or enabling anti-Semitism?
Not at all. What he said was true, and with respect, there's no dispute about this. The documents are there. The coins in which the Jewish people in Germany's money was transferred to Palestine, with the Nazi symbol on one side and the Star of David on the other, are extant. You don't have to go to a museum to see them. There was an agreement, the Havara Agreement, between the Nazis and the Zionist movement in Germany. That doesn't mean the Zionists in Germany were Nazis or that the Nazis were Zionists. It means that they shared this, and it's the idea which persists, that German Jews, French Jews, British Jews are not actually German, French, or British. They are aliens, and they must go. They must go and live, as it turned out, in somebody else's country. There's no dispute about that at all. There would be a dispute if Ken Livingstone had said Hitler was a Zionist, and I'm reading that in every newspaper today. But of course, he didn't say anything of the kind. It's become an urban myth in 24 hours. He said that Hitler and the Zionists cooperated with the proposal to ship Germany's Jews to Palestine, and for the same reasons that I just described. So this is an entirely synthetic firestorm. It's wiped Panama Papers, Sir Philip Green, Jeremy Hunt, the Hillsborough Inquiry. It's wiped them all off the front page. It's unbelievable. This is your first item, and me and Jeremy are arguing about this. Jeffrey, rather, beg your pardon, are arguing about this, rather than people arguing about the gigantic problems and issues that exist here in our own country, in the here and now.
03030 80 55 55. Let's take a couple of calls. Damien, hello.
Hi, William. William, just on your question, about is it becoming more difficult to criticise Israel? Are you labelled an anti-Semitic? I think I'd just like to make the point that Jeffrey tried to do precisely that in the way he tried to conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, or anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. He said that there are people who want the Jews removed from the state of Israel, but couldn't name anyone, let alone anyone in the Labour Party. And I would also like to ask Jeffrey if he would condemn people saying that the biggest problem in the state of Israel is the Arabs of Israel, or that the mothers of all Palestinians should be killed. Because the people that have uttered those statements are members of the current Israeli government.
Jeffrey Donaldson.
Well, Damien, first of all, I did actually say that the attitude that I attributed towards removing all the Jews from Israel was Hamas. So I did actually say that was their viewpoint. It's actually in their constitution.
But nobody in Labour said that, Jeff.
And I didn't say they did, Damien.
So why bring it into this debate?
Because the point I was making, if you'd listened to what I'd said rather than let your prejudice get in front of you, was this, that people need to be very careful in terms of what they say. It's entirely legitimate to criticise Israel.
No irony
it is entirely legitimate to say that you want a different solution for Israel and Palestine. But if you support the concept that the Jews should be removed from Israel, then, in my opinion, and I'm entitled to my opinion, Damien, you may have a different one, in my opinion, that potentially crosses a line, and therefore it could be argued is potentially anti-Semitic. And I never attributed that attitude to any member of the Labour Party. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying that all of us in this debate need to be careful and that we do not give the extremists succor for the idea that one of the solutions, potential solutions, is to drive the Jews out of Israel using violent means.
Damien, thank you very much. And I think, to be fair to Jeffrey Donaldson, I framed the question in terms of language specifically that time rather than the Labour Party, which is why he addressed the issue more widely. But are you saying, Jeffrey, that you believe... Obviously, there are people who are anti-Semitic within Hamas, and there are people who are anti-Semitic within every political party one could imagine, just as there are racists across the spectrum. We all accept that, right? But are you saying that you believe that the official policies of Hamas are only potentially anti-Semitic or actually are anti-Semitic?
Well, I think that they are anti-Semitic when you use language, and I mean the statements are there. They're a matter of public record. They've talked openly about driving the Jews into the sea. I think that is anti-Semitic.
George, would you agree with that?
The
official policies of Hamas.
I hate to say this to Jeffrey, but that's not in the Hamas constitution. And the quote about driving Jews into the sea originates from a Mr. Shakuri, who was the leader of the PLO in the 1950s, before Yasser Arafat became the leader. I don't say that to embarrass him. I just say it to illustrate how urban myths travel. I'm not a supporter of Hamas. I hate Islamist extremism. There is no greater opponent of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on in the world than me. But it's important that we don't let these things run away with themselves, because, of course, the next thing that would be said is that Jeremy Corbyn shared a meeting one day, took a selfie with, one day, someone from Hamas who believe in driving Jews into the sea, when in fact that predates the existence of Hamas by more than 30 years, that statement. I don't want to transport anybody. I don't want anybody to leave. I want the Palestinians who have houses and lands and the title and the keys to be allowed to return to their country. That's true, but I don't want any Jews to leave Israel, Palestine. And therefore, I will continue to speak my mind as clearly and as powerfully as I can. And I think that Ken Livingstone has been treated very badly. And I think that the end result will be very bad for the people who suspended him. Because what they've done, we have a saying in Glasgow, if you don't run, they can't chase you. Well, Mr. Corbyn did run, and my goodness, they're all chasing him now.
How do you think this is going to work out for Ken Livingstone?
Well, he'll make, of course, a powerful and historically based defence. If it goes to a court of law, there is no question at all that Livingstone would be vindicated. But it probably means that his plans to re-enter Parliament, for example, are now scuppered, certainly for the immediate future. And like all of us, he's not getting any younger. So it's quite damaging. It's damaging to the left, it's damaging to the Labour Party, and it's damaging to the people who suspended him.
Mervyn, welcome. Hello, Mervyn.
Hiya, William. You keeping all right?
I'm doing well, Mervyn.
Good. William, 2 brief points. I'm very interested in what George Galloway has to say, because I think a lot of things that he says is very accurate and very honest. But my personal belief at the minute with regard to the Labour Party, 2 brief points. The Labour Party is so divided, I strongly believe it will split eventually. Because left-wing politics and what you suppose you would call right-wing politics in Labour are just not meeting. There is a real level of dislike and mistrust in that party at the moment. Secondly, if anyone believes that throughout British politics, through many, many decades, that there is no real level of anti-Semitism within the party, politics in the UK, then they're living in Cloud Cuckoo Land. It's as simple as that. It's there, it always will be, and it's not going to go away.
Mervyn, thanks very much. Jeffrey, have you ever come across examples of anti-Semitism in Parliament? I'm not asking you to name anybody, obviously, but from other MPs, other politicians?
No, I have to be very honest and say I haven't personally heard any member of Parliament in my presence being openly anti-Semitic, and I'm all for a proper debate, and actually I would say to George that if Jeremy Corbyn did decide to share a platform with Hamas, I wouldn't be challenging that. I'd be saying to Jeremy Corbyn, well, look, use the opportunity to press Hamas on the need for a peaceful settlement, for a negotiated settlement, to pursue their objectives by peaceful means alone. But I think that it's important. This is a debate that affects the whole of the Middle East, and we want to see the process moving forward.
It does, but I'm really taken by your tone and what you're saying today, Jeffrey, because you're very close to what George Galloway is saying. Not that we were trying to set this up simply as a conflict item or a debate, but it's very interesting. I wonder if deep down you actually believe what we're seeing right now is a knee-jerk deployment of the anti-Semitism slur in the terms that George has just described as a way to kind of shut down the debate, when in fact we have in British politics no bigger a problem with this than we have in other places. Well,
2 points I would certainly agree with George on. Number one, I'm out canvassing in Lagan Valley here on the doorsteps, and Lagan Valley's certainly not a Labour stronghold, but no one is talking about this on the doorstep, so it's clearly not an issue for the man and woman in the street. But secondly, I think that Jeremy Corbyn is under pressure. There's no doubt about that. There is a lot of internal division within the Labour Party. Some of it covered over, some of it very, very public. If left to his own devices, do I think Jeremy Corbyn would have acted the way he did this week, given his own record in being a strong supporter of the Palestinians? No, I don't. I think he's under pressure internally. I think he had to be seen to be doing something.
He's been bounced into it.
To a certain extent, yes. That doesn't negate, William, the very valid debate we've had this morning about, where are the red lines in terms of the sensitivities of this debate, the right of Israel to exist, the need for a negotiated settlement with the Palestinians. Doesn't negate any of that. And indeed, it shouldn't be allowed to detract from that debate.
All right, let's take two more calls on this. We're talking to George Galloway and Jeffrey Donaldson. Your views on this to 03030 80 55 55. John, first of all. Hello, John.
Hello, William. Listen, I'm a great believer in free speech, but even there's limits to free speech, you understand? Now, it seems to me that the waters have been muddied here, and people are actually saying Israel and the Jews, and they're mixing this together. And I think I would differentiate between the Israeli state, which at times need to be definitely criticised, and the Jewish people. Because, and when I was in London, I worked there for years, and my boss and his wife were Jewish, and I could tell you I wouldn't have a word said against them. They were absolutely brilliant people.
Yes, John, but if the waters are being muddied, John, if the waters are muddied, who muddied the waters?
Well, you see, I know people have an agenda, and George obviously has an agenda because he was attacked, you understand, for his views, you understand. You see, George has this attitude, on free speech, he can say anything. And when it comes to free speech, you have to be careful. And I say that, you can't use free speech to insult anybody or attack them verbally or whatever. That is totally wrong. And you can't use it even to put it in the newspaper. So free speech has to have a limit. You understand? Now, what I'm saying is that the people I met in London, I met up with Maurice Chernick, the champion high diver of London, and his family, who was also called Maurice. They were brilliant people, and I would not have a word said against them. They live out at New Barnet down there, and they were fantastic people. And I would have loved to, if I was in London now, I would love to be working for Mr. Polson. That was my boss. I would love to be working for him.
John.
And there's a lot of Jewish people, and they shouldn't be tied in with what's happening in Israel.
John, thank you very much. Can I just pick up on that with George? Because this muddying of the waters in terms of the difference between Jews and Israelis.
William, I'm sitting on my campaign bus here right now with not one but several Jewish comrades of mine.
Sure.
So there's nobody muddying the waters from my end. I'm the one that says Judaism, Jews, Jewish people, the religion are entirely different things from the political, ideological idea of Zionism and the state of Israel itself.
Do you also accept that Jews are part of an ethnicity, not merely members of a religion?
No, I don't. And I gave you the example. The man that attacked me became a Jew 4 weeks or 5 weeks before he attacked me. Any one of us here can become a Jew. So it simply cannot be maintained that Judaism is an ethnicity. However, if a large group, as they have, of Jewish people are born on a piece of land now called Israel, they immediately are possessed of national rights. They have a right to stay there. One can tell them to go home, still less transport them to some home they've never seen. So the Jewish people who live in Israel have national rights. And that's why I argue that a state, a binational state, called Israel-Palestine, where everyone who's entitled to be there stays there as equal citizens, is unbeatable. Now, Jeffrey makes the point, and he's right, it's not likely to happen, but neither is the two-state solution of which he speaks likely to happen. He talks of a peace process, but there is no peace process and hasn't been for many years. I supported the Oslo Agreement. I've forgotten how long ago now, more than 20 years ago. And not a centimetre of Palestinian land is free in that 20 years. And new settlements sprout up in the Palestinian share of the Oslo Agreement on a daily basis.
One final call on this from Anne. Hello, Anne.
Hello, William. William, it is pathetic to listen to a Northern Ireland politician discussing other countries. Let them get their own house in order, because you've only to have listened to the First Minister last night. This place was set up bigoted by the Unionist government, so let them get their own house in order and don't dare criticise any other country.
Anne, first of all, Jeffrey Donaldson is here as our guest. We invited him to take part in this discussion. That's why he's taking part in the discussion. Why do you think politicians anywhere should limit themselves to their own territory? Shouldn't politicians be concerned about global issues?
Shouldn't politicians look after their own country first?
Of course they should, but shouldn't they also be concerned about other countries?
This is not being sorted out. The unionists want to rule, and they just take the bread that falls from the table. They've still got that attitude. So this place was set up to be like that. Now, Brookborough said at the beginning.
Anne, this is ancient history, Anne.
No, it's not history. You just can't live with it. You have to face up to it. And poor Jeffrey, I could roar at my leg off at him, listening to him. They don't come any more bigoted.
Oh, now, hang on a minute. That's not right. That's not fair. And thank you very much. But we've got to give you free speech, but you can't cross that line either, especially in a conversation about appropriate speech. Sorry, Jeffrey, about that. We did invite you to take part. Have a word with Anne. She's not here, but she may still be listening, about the importance of politicians speaking. Please do, George.
I respect Jeffrey Donaldson. I come from a very different religious and political background than him, but he has never shown me other than courteous hearing, and I think he's an honourable person, even though we have many disagreements, including on this subject.
Anne's put the phone down, so she doesn't want to hear your response, but there you are. Jeffrey, on this wider point about local politicians addressing issues beyond your own jurisdiction, why is that important to you? Because you do a lot of that.
Well, I do, William, because I think that we can learn from other situations and we can also share our own experience with others. And I think in Northern Ireland we've been on a journey. I think a lot has changed. Sorry, Anne doesn't recognise that, but it has. And, as I go out and about, and I'm in Lisburn at the moment, I'm out and about meeting people today. I'm visiting a business at the moment here, meeting local people. And I listen to what they have to say. And I don't recognise in what Anne said as being the attitude that prevails among people right across the community divide in Northern Ireland. And I think it's important that Northern Ireland politicians do take an interest in what's happening in other parts of the world. I do. I know George did when he was in Parliament, and that's right. And we should seek to use our influence for good wherever we can.
Jeffrey, thank you very much. Lovely to talk to you today. Jeffrey Donaldson, and you too, George Galloway. Thanks for joining us from the campaign bus there, making his way around London. 03030 80 55